Thank you for your courtesy.
Yes, not at all, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Geithner, the state of California arguably has lost the largest number of jobs due to a whole host of unfair Chinese trade policies. And my district, the 39th, ranks 32nd out of all 435 congressional districts in jobs lost due to unfair Chinese trade. And we've now had 2 days of testimony where we've talked about, where people have argued over to what degree is Chinese currency undervalued. And the fact of the matter is we have consensus that it is significantly undervalued, and that does provide huge disadvantage for our exports and for in relation to Chinese exports to this country. I'm curious to know, because several people have suggested different ways of trying to attack the problem, whether the Obama administration has a position on the Currency Reform and Fair Trade Act, which is a bill that's been introduced by Representatives Tim Ryan from Ohio and Tim Murphy from Pennsylvania, has 143 co-sponsors in the Congress, members on both sides of the aisle. Does the administration have a position on that bill?
Well, as I said to your colleagues today that asked me that question earlier, the administration has not taken a position yet. We're taking a careful look at it, both in terms of whether it's consistent with our obligations internationally and whether it's got the right mix of leverage. And we're looking at it carefully, but we have not taken a position yet.
Okay. The other thing I'd like to do is I'd like to ask you, clearly we're not the only country that suffers from unfair trade practices. And we have some allies out there, and they're competitors as well, but they're sort of stuck in the same situation. And I yesterday likened our situation with China to children on a schoolyard who've agreed to play a game. They've agreed to the ground rules for the game. And China is sort of the 800-pound gorilla on the block that we find is the game. And there's consensus among everybody playing the game that there's something underhanded and unfair going on, and people are grumbling about it. And to take the analogy one step further, they're playing for lunch money, let's say, something that directly impacts their financial ability. And yet nobody seems to want to stand up to the cheater because they all fear retaliation. And I go back to my former background where there is power in numbers, and I have to believe that other countries like Brazil, Japan, the European Union have a vested interest in seeing China play by the rules, so to speak, rules that I might add they've agreed to in treaties. So my question is, what do I tell my constituents or the small businesses in my district who've been financially impacted by unfair trade? What can I tell them other than we want to talk to them about this problem? What can I tell them that the administration and you are doing to try to help remedy that situation? Because I believe we sort of hit this critical juncture where we either stand up for ourselves now or China grows too big and too strong and we are forever at their mercy. I don't, quite frankly, relish the thought that the United States ends up in that position. So
I like your analogy a lot, with one exception. And this is important. I know that people are very concerned about the challenges we face as a country, but just for some perspective, we are the 800-pound gorilla. We are the largest
700-pound
economies in the world.
next to us.
Not even close in relative size. We are the largest economy in the world. We are the most productive economy in the world. We have the best technology. We are vastly far ahead of them.
Therefore,
they are catching up.
Therefore, wouldn't we have the leverage then to really stand up and do something?
Excellent point. You're also exactly right to say that they agreed to abide by a set of rules, and it is our job to hold them to those rules. We have two basic things that we have the authority to do, even with current law. One is to make sure that American firms can use our countervailing duty laws and our anti-dumping laws to make sure, and the import safeguard laws, and our 421 laws, to make sure they are protected from both unfair trade practices and surges in imports from China. And we are using those laws very effectively to give those protections. The second is you can tell them that we have rights under the WTO to go make sure that the China is doing something else in China that limits access to to their markets to us or unfairly discriminates, that we can take them to the WTO and get them to change their practice. And we are using those tools much more aggressively and very effectively to try to get better protections for intellectual property, less discrimination in those markets. Now, we got a long way to go. And we're having an important debate again, as many of you said, not about objectives. We're in heated agreement on the objectives we face. We're in heated agreement on the concerns we have with what's happening in China. The challenge we all face with is what's a better set of additional tools or leverage or persuasiveness that we can do. And you're also right to say that we're working very actively with countries around the world, those countries that compete with China. Many of these practices have, you could say, more adverse effects on them because China competes more directly with them than they do with us in many areas. And we're going to try to use all those tools and, of course, work with you and your colleagues to see if we can find better approaches.
I appreciate your answer. I just want to mention, I really encourage you to take a look at the Currency Reform for Fair Trade Act. And with that, I will yield back to the chairman.
Well, I think that was an appropriate